Welcome to New York Bio's Virtual Breakfast Series, a digital program started in 2020 bringing you fireside chats with leaders across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Carlo Yuvienco, Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships at Envisagenics.
This is going to be great. I have the express pleasure of introducing Carlo Yuvienco, who I've known for a long time, has been a huge impact on New York City's biomedical ecosystem, first at EDC and now as business development for Envisagenics, which is a great startup company run by Maria Luisa Pineda. So, Carlo, it is wonderful to have you here.
Thanks so
I
much,
don't
Derek.
really have any New York Bio housekeeping. Thank you to everybody that came to the Bio CEO networking event on Sunday. And for those of you who are in New York at Bio CEO this week, I hope you're enjoying things. It's actually a great time to be in the city. And it's also warmer than it was this weekend. So Carlo, good morning. It is wonderful to have you here. Why don't we kick it off a little bit with an origin story of yours? So just to set things up a little bit, we've known each other for a long time. Carlo was involved in basically launching the LifeSci NYC initiative at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, which I think has been transformative for this community in New York City. He has everything. He's a homegrown New York City success story. Grew up in New York City, postdoc and PhD at NYU. So Carlo, without further ado, how are you? It's wonderful to have you here. Tell us where you come from.
It's great. It's great to be on. Thanks again, Derek and Jennifer, for the invitation to join this wonderful series. I'm a big fan and was honored to be invited. His origin story. So, I see Jennifer's joining. Hi, Jennifer.
Comes.
Hi, Jennifer.
Morning, Jennifer.
Good morning. Sorry, everyone.
That's okay. It's
Okay.
one of those days. As I
Timing.
told people, the milk in our fridge in the office is off, so I don't even have a cup of coffee this morning. We're all just going to power through. We're going to be fine.
That might actually be worse than my being late.
It's okay. We're gonna get there. It's okay.
So Jennifer, you just joined just in time. Derek was asking me for my origin story. So I would say it's a seemingly typical immigrant story. My folks, they emigrated from the Philippines to New York City in the early 1970s. And how that went down is that my father was a general surgeon back in the Philippines. He had two kids there, with one on the way, an additional one on the way. And he left my mother and my siblings to pursue a residency at New York University. He was invited to attend for urology and specialize in urology, and then later on went on to a fellowship in urology also at NYU. And this was in the early 1970s. And through his experience here, he had the intentions of going back to the Philippines, rejoining his family and pursuing a practice back home. But he also, while practicing here as a resident and then as a fellow, realized that there was a lot of opportunity in the US and particularly New York City. And so he made the very bold, brave move to move his family here. And so my mother, now with three children, came to the United States. And then another one of my siblings was born here at NYU. So he's a US citizen, as am I 10 years later. Mm-hmm. And so we're very much an immigrant family. We're very much a New York City family. And so, one of the through lines to my life and how I've made my career decisions is with New York City being synonymous for me and for my family with opportunity. Mm-hmm. And so I personally, I grew up in Manhattan. So I'm an Upper East Side kid. Public school education most of the way, everything from elementary all the way through high school, and then went on to pursue chemical engineering at the Cooper Union, which is also in Manhattan. And then following a degree in engineering, went on to join a New York company called Paul Corporation, specifically their life sciences division, which was headquartered in Long Island. It was very much a Long Island company. It still is. It's now part of Danaher. I believe that happened in the 2000s. But prior to that, it had a long legacy, a rich legacy of being a sort of Long Island centric company. A lot of its scientists came out of Long Island universities and Long Island scientific community. And I specifically worked on, as a chemical engineer, melt blown filtration media for blood filters. So it was sort of my first foray into the life sciences, really applied life sciences. And it's funny, the melt blown filtration media would actually later on go on to inform a lot of the expertise and conversations I had to have, unfortunately, during the COVID pandemic, and the dialogue that needed to get started between EDC and some of these N95 respirator providers.
Yep. I was just thinking about when you were talking about that, I was like, oh, I seem to have acquired some knowledge about that in recent years.
Yeah, I think we all sort of got a very informal training in N95 filtration media. I was formally trained, oddly enough. And it was one of those things that when I brought it up at the EDC, they honestly, they couldn't believe that actually was expertise I had. And then following a short stint in industry, a couple of years there, I ended up going back for a doctorate. Went back to NYU, which was previously Brooklyn Polytechnic. Again, this was fed a lot by a lot of the Paul Corporation employees. So that's sort of the natural progression. That later on went on to become NYU School of Engineering. And I would say that was very formative to how I started to make professional decisions in entrepreneurship, in my commitment to EDC, and then eventually to my time at Envisagenics, is that embracing of the modern ethos of entrepreneurship and how that intersects with biotechnology, not just in New York, but also globally. And then, met some of the great influencers and mentors in that NYU community. Among them, obviously, my PI, Jen Montclair, who probably, against the grain of majority of academics, she fully embraced entrepreneurship, not just for herself, but also for her students and her student body at large. And that extended into other realms at NYU that became her ally and became, by extension, my ally. So Frank Rimolowski, who you might be acquainted with, he runs the NYU Venture Fund and also the Leslie E Lab at NYU. And I got to know him and his shop very early on in the days of when the National Science Foundation I-Corps program was just getting started here in New York. And so myself, together with my PI, became among the first in the cohort in the New York City node for NSF I-Corps. And we're very proud of the work that we did there and trying to spin out technology that we had patented in the lab. And there's a slew of other experiences throughout the time at NYU that just injected me with that enthusiasm for entrepreneurship.
Well, I do believe you've missed something that you told us about in our preparation, which was a middle school foray into entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So I guess my first foray into entrepreneurship would be back, and this is one of the great things about growing up in New York City, is that the kids here, and a lot of my siblings grew up in the suburbs in Long Island, and there it's perhaps a little different. There's perhaps more to do, right, recreationally, whereas in the city, you sort of, as a kid, you can't really go out and wander around, so you're left to your own devices to be productive and keep things interesting. And so for me, my family was always very entrepreneurial. My father, he had an independent practice when that was still feasible and lucrative. Yeah. And business was something that we fully embraced. And so when I was in middle school, I had a knack for computers. I still do. And
good to know. I'll remember that.
Where were
I
you 20
decided
minutes ago, Carlo?
Yes, but I couldn't get my computer to restart.
it's one of those it's one of those hidden skills. Along with N95 filtration media. I back in middle school, I took a bunch of my friends and I said, look, let's do something more with our time than just watching MTV Cribs, right? Can we please do something that's more productive? I have connections into folks who are looking to network their computers in their offices. These are small offices. Come with me, work overnight. We'll be elves working overnight, and we'll make a couple $1,000. And these are simple now. I mean, I could do this in my sleep, but frankly, that would take me 2 days. Come join me, and then we'll go celebrate with beers for one night's worth of work.
In middle school?
And so I'll skip that. So I took two of my friends back then, and we would do these networking jobs, small IT networking jobs, running cable, setting up Windows NT networks, work groups, and just getting these small offices, small businesses, mostly some nonprofits, just up and running. And
awesome.
It was a fantastic experience in terms of managing a small, lean team, fantastic experience generating business and talking to customers and providing customer service. It was a phenomenal experience. And, I only wish that every New York City kid could take advantage of that type of opportunity that New York City has because of its density and because of its demands. So that's the one side story.
But you're right. Like it also is indicative of sort of what New York offers, right? And then sort of how you can create so much, whether it's a life science company or in your case, right? You were entrepreneur in a sort of a IT business. And I think it's pretty amazing that as a, middle school, early high schooler, that you could do that. And frankly, that people would hire you to do that. I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the entrepreneurial bug was early. So how did you wind up at the EDC? So you get your PhD, so how do you end up at the EDC in the middle of all of that?
Yeah, so as I was telling you, I was trying to spin out technology out of NYU. Through that, I learned of an EDC program called NYC eLab. It's an entrepreneurial training program that used to be offered. It's no longer offered, at least not under the auspices of EDC's oversight. And it was and is still run by Mary Howard, who's phenomenal in terms of what she has stood up as a program to support early stage founders. And I got in one of their classes. It was on an annual basis. And through that, I got to know Raphael Farzan-Kashani, who at the time was with the life sciences team at EDC and project managing the eLab NYC program, right? Mary was running it. She was the operator, and Raphael was the contract holder at EDC. EDC was sort of always in the backdrop. Lindsay or Raphael would sort of make their remarks. But it never was sort of front and center. And so I didn't really get to know EDC until Raphael and I got to become more acquainted through that year in 2015 of the program. And towards the tail end of that year, he knew that I was sort of transitioning off of that project at NYU. And we can go into that if you want, but it's not super interesting. But then Raphael is telling me, look, while you're thinking about your next move, why don't you come and work for the EDC for at least a couple of months, because I could really use your help on something that I'm working on. I can't tell you more, but
take it on faith.
I think you and I seemingly click. You get it. You're a New Yorker. I think you'll like what we're doing. And I think you'll believe in sort of the vision. So I said, okay, it's very mysterious. And I thought that I was
come with me on this journey.
Yeah. But I seem to be attracted to visionaries. So I said, okay, you know what? I'll go with you. I thought it had something to do with NYU, with the New York City life sciences funding initiative. So, and Derek, I know that you want to touch upon that, but that was a big sort of sidecar fund specific for New York City founded companies that was in partnership with Arch Venture Partners and Flagship Pioneering. And so I thought that was the sort of recent big news at the time that came out of the EDC. So I thought, oh, that sounds exciting. Maybe it's that or some augmentation of that. All right, I'll sign up. I get there first day. And this is funny because this is the week before JPM. And Lindsay and Raphael, who's the life sciences team, were both going. So they my first day, it was 1.5 days with them, and then they left me in the office by myself. And they said, yeah, welcome aboard. You're going to be working with us on a real estate study.
You're like,
I
what?
That I'm a PhD in protein engineering. What do you? That's what you thought I would be helpful for is real estate? So over the next 6 months of my contract work with them, literally as a temp or as an intern,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even have a permanent desk. They were, they had me sitting in on land use meetings and talking to folks that have now become long-lasting friends like Bill Harvey and listening to the needs of, not just the real estate community, but the life sciences community as we know it at large. These would be budding founders, they would be scientists, they would be academic leadership. And, the more I sort of just took in everything and said, look, I promised Raphael I would help them. I don't know if I'm going to be helpful, but I'll listen, surely. The more I saw that there was an opportunity for both myself, but also a huge opportunity for the city.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, this is potentially going to be the most important work that I may do in the near future. I have to stay. And so that's what ended up happening. I ended up falling in love with the work and with the team. And it became even a leaner team throughout the year. Lindsay Harcum unfortunately left the team in the summer of 2016. And so it was just Raphael and myself. And you can imagine what that must have felt like. It's really a startup.
Yeah.
And a ton of credit goes to the two of them and particularly Raphael, because a lot of this stood on his shoulders. And he really became an inspiration to me and a mentor to me. He really taught me how to I like to think about it as the guerrilla tactics of economic development. A lot of people think of work, whether it's at EDC or just in general in government, as sort of, locked up, slow moving, a big oil tanker, very powerful, but very slow moving, hard to turn, hard to stop, hard to start. But one of the great things about Raphael would be that his personality was to talk to allies, necessary allies, and make necessary allies throughout the organization, and build their confidence in a vision, and then get them on board with helping us when they actually really didn't need to or should have wanted to. These would be people who didn't know anything about life sciences. They knew real estate, they knew finance, they knew land use, but somehow Raphael and then eventually myself, we got them on board. And it was not without that coalition building internally at EDC with our allies at City Hall that Life Sci NYC would not have happened.
So, Carlo, did you look at other, obviously you were, New York wasn't known, right, for life sciences. It was known for lots of other, sorts of pieces of industry. Finance, obviously, being sort of entertainment, right? But what about tourism? Did you look at best practices from other areas of the country that had a strong life science presence? Or how did you even sort of figure out what the city needed to do to incentivize the growth of the sector?
Yeah.
So there was a study that was commissioned by the EDC in 2015 And when I entered, we're starting to review the final submissions of that material. It was a multi-consultancy study. There were a couple of folks that were involved. BCG included. Borough Happold, I believe, was the general contractor there that was sort of coalescing all the different reports. Yasmin Patty, phenomenal phenomenal project manager and advisor to life sciences companies currently in the ecosystem. She worked on that report as well. And, we were taking stock of it, and a lot of it did look to other ecosystems,
Mhm.
and, the notable is San Francisco and Cambridge. And a lot of it was a real estate analysis of how organic growth happened there. And it did inform some of the interventions that we had built out, but at the same time, there was an acknowledgement of myself and by Raphael that New York City is also a different starting equation.
Very much so.
You've
But
got-
I was literally just thinking how to get that in there, right? It's keep going. But I remember these discussions where you would look at Boston and San Francisco, and the numbers were so far ahead of everyone else that it's hard to actually equate those two things and say, well, could you even get there if you wanted to? But the difference is just stark, right? It's the two halves, and everyone else is a have-not.
Yeah, and look, it's prior to New York City sort of really getting its foot in this life sciences economic development game wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
I would say prior to Alexandria, not a lot of folks, not a lot of municipalities were really looking at life sciences biotech because of that stark
Yeah.
superseding gain that is, or lead, I would say, that Cambridge, San Diego, San Francisco had on everyone else. Why bother, right? New York City's got entertainment, tourism, fire, so that's finance, insurance, and real estate. Why do we need to diversify more? Fashion,
Mhm.
tech.
I really thought you were saying that we had fires. Like
I
I
know,
thought you
I
were
was-
saying that was a thing that we had. Like, well, that's interesting. Sure, let's.
I was
talk
like,
about
where
it.
are we going
I
with
don't
this?
see a lot of these fires, but okay.
Fire industry. That's what we used to call them at EDC, the fire industries.
I've learned something new today, Carlo.
Yeah, I did too. That's a good one.
And so,
But it's funny, you think about this, right? Now, I remember ages ago being in these focus groups at at the New York Academy of Sciences, and the academic firepower was always there, right? The academic firepower was always there, and that substrate was always there, and the real estate, the capital kind of weren't, right? And that was just this big gap. And there's probably so many reasons for this. I have my own theses behind it, culture, but I'm not going to bore everybody with that. But you get to the point where I think you're nailing it with well, should we even do this, right? As a city, should we have all of this other stuff? Why do we also need another kind of shiny thing in our industry garage, so to speak? Why do we need to stoke this if we can just double down on Project Runway?
no, that's true. Or in the case of the de Blasio administration, universal pre-K, right?
Although I don't know that the business ROI on universal pre-K was really the same. I think it's hard to make a commercial case for that one.
That's true. That's true.
Great program. Love a lot of things about the program,
Great.
but I don't think it's an investable opportunity in many ways.
I don't know. Carlo started in middle school. We might be. We might have preschoolers and entrepreneurs headed our way.
I mean, we're really not looking at the enterprising side hustle middle school market closely enough here.
I'm feeling that there's a program, an EDC program that's brewing here. So going back to that big question of whether we should do this or not, right? And I think that, look, there was an acknowledgement, a reality check with us that there's a different starting equation, there's different ingredients here, but they're really worthwhile ingredients. They're really otherwise wasted ingredients. The academic institutions, we started to see, deeper patterns also that was happening at the academic institutions. It's not just throwing a bunch of logos of schools on a PowerPoint and saying, look, why not? Right?
Yeah.
It was, you going three levels deeper and understanding what was happening just as an example of what, how long had Orrin Herskowitz been at Columbia, and what has he been doing with that time and building up momentum for, and what were the bullets that he was getting ready to fire, and seeing sort of the early shots of the lab to market accelerator, lab to market network, and seeing similar efforts with academic venture funds and the Tri-I TDI and what they were trying to accomplish with Takeda. The academics are not just logos, they're on board with this.
Yeah.
They're on board with, and they have allies that would later become now columns of support for this community, like Deerfield. And look, maybe we got lucky, or maybe deep down we knew that these allies would coalesce if we provided a signal and provided our best shots, right? Not all of them were going to work. The nice thing about this whole thing, the Life Sci NYC initiative, is that we had a lot of firepower to have multiple shots on goal and take risky shots. Some of them, some of the interventions, and we had this in the prep exchange, but some of those interventions that we tried early on, it didn't cost a lot, but they cost a little bit, time, but also some money that, they ended up fizzling. That's okay.
Yeah. Well,
right?
I mean, so ambitious, right? It basically, I think there were 10 kind of initiatives in the basket, right? And so, okay, let's wind into this here. So how did the group collectively start to think about how big could this be, right? Like it was a big number, it's 500 million, right, to start. So how do you actually know where the political appetite is for how big this initiative is supposed to be? Because we never had something like this before. 100 million would have seemed big at the time. This was before like $100 million was an average A round, right?
Yeah.
So how do you actually get to size, especially thinking about how this was, exploratory, right?
Sure.
This is really big, and how did you get kind of the clout in the room to do this big initiative with this much money? And did anybody say something along the lines of like, well, could you try a smaller one first and see if it works?
We did try a smaller one. That's called Alexandria. That's called eLab NYC. That's called SBIR Impact. That's called what we did back at Audubon and our support of SUNY Downstate's incubator. I want to call out something here. Life Sci NYC is not the first time that EDC has gotten its
That's true.
so wet with life sciences, right? You guys give me a lot of credit. Thank you so much. But I am standing on the shoulders of giants here of both Raphael, but also Lindsay Harcum, who preceded him in history at EDC, and then before him, Bill Fair.
True. To push back though, this was the biggest thing that was literally under the EDC's umbrella, right? The other ones were a little bit more singular, right? And especially in the case of Alexandria, right? Like if you ask Joel Marcus who got the credit for that, I'm pretty sure that he would reference his team, right? So this I think was the biggest umbrella where the EDC could basically have it, under its logo. This is ours. This is what we're doing. The others, I agree, kind of built up to that, but this was really collectively bigger than all of those things, and it was together, right? All of those other things were discrete and here and there, and not necessarily all in parallel and all under the same umbrella, all in the same basket.
So that was a big distinction. And acknowledgement of our team of, look, if this is going to happen, it needs to be a cohesive plan. It can't just be a real estate intervention. It can't just be something to support nonprofits and capital through capital grants. And it can't just be one-off, programs here and there. They have to be part of a cohesive vision of interventions. So, that's when you got those three pillars. And if audience members go back to the latest, no, not the latest, the past episode of Doug Thede, where you interview him and he talks about those three pillars. But to go into a bit more granular detail, so the way that happened is the real estate side was mostly IDA tax abatements, right? That is foregone taxes to incentivize the economics to pencil out for real estate developers to build speculative lab real estate in New York City when there wasn't a confirmed market of demand. And so what we did there is scenario analysis, taking into account land value, taking account developer costs for a particular site to convert either a retrofitted site into a lab capable building, or in some cases, a complete new build. And so Deerfield, as an example, is a retrofit. So is, I'd say labs, but a lot of that structure was completely overhauled. And look, we didn't have to activate all the buildings, but just enough to start validating that there was a life sciences real estate market that had a trajectory of growth here. So there was scenario building there to work out what the economics would be, to not finance and help finance the entire building, but just enough to make it pencil out for a developer. And then on so that was a $300 million earmarked initiative of foregone taxes. So it's actually not cash; it's taxes that would have that we're sacrificing as income for the city. And then on the capital side, so this is nonprofits. How do we help nonprofits? Typically, that's through capital grants to build out infrastructure. And then there's risk there, though. Is there, how do you give money to an academic institution to leverage it to build something that services more than just its institution?
Right.
Right.
That's number one. Number two is how much money. This comes back to the sizing issue, right? And so for a lot of that, we did look to Boston and Cambridge. The Massachusetts Life Sciences Center had already been up and running since 08, 09.
Yeah.
And we looked to see, because they had a very successful and thriving capital award process, what's the type of facilities that were getting activated with that? And what portion did there need to be of government intervention and subsidy to get that project to completion? Was it 100%, or should we have asked, and should we be asking nonprofits to come in and meet us in the middle, 50-50, third? And so there's that program, and I actually worked on that. That was my sort of portfolio while I was at EDC, one of my portfolios. And then programmatic side, we earmarked $50 million for that, to do things like eLab NYC, to continue investing in early stage companies. I would say that that's where we probably could have done more. But we also, racked up some wins in that third pillar that we're very proud of at the same time, including the internship program.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had a question. And so I think the question was in the context of the EDC. Although I think we can talk about this question when we talk about your work at Envisagenics. It's the question is, we'd love to hear about the programs that you were most focused on and how you worked with other peers and collaborators. So we'll save the Envisagenics piece of that for later, but talk about how you found collaborators other than the real estate and learning from what other collaborators did you need to engage in the ecosystem to make it work?
Well, we certainly engaged with NewYorkBIO. We certainly engaged with the academic community. They were starting to build their own networks and sort of orbits of allies. And so it was that network effect that we started to bring together folks. These would be people on the finance side, so these would be investors. And this leads into a conversation about Arch Venture Partners and Tom Brennan. Mm-hmm. And I think that although not formally a part of the Life Sci NYC initiatives, it did fall under the life sciences team at EDC, is the venture funding initiative. And one of the best things that came out of my time at EDC was the work that Tom did in, look, arguably, could they have invested more in New York City in terms of company investments? Yes. But perhaps their most long-lasting impact was the networking and the awareness that Tom Brennan built of life sciences, and the fact that you could commercialized technology. That
Yep.
that it, you know, look, was Arch going to invest in every, every bit of science in the 5 boroughs? No, but the fact that they were here and listening, and that they had at least one very passionate internal champion in Tom Brennan, that spoke volumes to so many people, inspired so many people to continue on with their work, and
He
some
was
of them
great.
now successful.
He was great. I mean, I can speak from personal experience. He introduced you to other investors. He dug in and he did the work to basically like dig in and understand what everybody was doing. He turned over every rock he could find. He was in labs. He was there in person. He was just awesome. He would listen to you. He would ask good questions. He brought a lot. He brought a lot. So even if they didn't invest in a lot of companies, and actually he actually tried to do more of that, right? So even if they didn't do that, I think his impact was really felt in a lot of different ways by a lot of different people, right? I mean,
Yeah.
listen, they ended up saying no to everybody but one, but I think just about everybody that kind of Tom dug in with really genuinely appreciated it, and knew full well the amount of work that he put into that stuff. So he really deserves a ton of credit for a lot of that in a big way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when people ask me, I was at EDC long enough to have a collection of contemporaries in economic development, now working in places like Tulsa and places across the country, and in some cases in international cities. And they ask me, how do we get this community going? I say, look, you want to make this easy on yourselves? Hire Tom Brennan.
Yeah, call Tom.
Call Tom.
It's not
Just
wrong.
give him some money to have a ton of coffees. Give him the liberty to walk the halls of your academic institutions, and I guarantee you, people will start getting excited about biotech entrepreneurship.
Well, it's funny, right? I mean, I think about a lot of this, and I think one of the big catalysts outside of the EDC was the fact that Versant and the accelerator came and put down roots here, right? And now you had more of that energy walking around. You had people that were asking questions, that you had potential capital behind it. And that kind of momentum, you need people that are going to come in with that kind of momentum and give the people working on either the companies or on the science, give them kind of a look at what the future could be, right? Give them this kind of curious, interested party that says, we want to make something out of this, and make them realize that there's a bigger thing out there that they can go for. It's the statistics are not great. Like most of the time, the answer is no, but that energy is real, and that enthusiasm is real. And I think one of the things about scientists, entrepreneurs, in particular life sciences, is everyone would really like to see the thing that they're working on take that next step, because of what it could mean for patients, for healthcare, for outcomes, et cetera. I think everybody has some level of drive around that, and seeing that opportunity, seeing that door open, is actually a really big thing. Because if the door is never open, if you never see it open, you can talk all you want about what it could do, but there's never any like kind of plausible possibility that one day it could go through that door.
It's all theoretical at that point.
Right. It goes from theoretical to this could actually be something. And
yeah,
it makes you really think about it. It makes you really work hard about it. And it makes you ask hard questions when you really need to get to the whole, could this be real thing?
Yeah. It's funny that there's two connections, that might work at EDC relate to, sort of what's happening now. One is, it's funny, I was re-listening to Maria's episode with you guys, and she was talking about one of the aha moments or turning points for Envisagenics as a company was when she was introduced to the folks at Breakout Labs. And she calls out Tom Brennan.
Yep.
Making that connection, right? And then it's another funny thing is that SBIR Impact NYC, which is an SBIR consulting program that the EDC subsidized. So we helped fund consulting hours for folks to get coaching on their SBIR submissions.
Yeah.
That program ended up inspiring Stacy Blaine, who you guys had recently.
Yeah.
And I think you guys would find this funny. Funny enough, Stacy was on my PhD committee.
Really? Yes.
Yeah.
The world just gets smaller and smaller. It really does. We exist in this small little bubble that gets surprisingly smaller every single time.
Yeah. So it's interesting. You're right about that the world's getting smaller, the room's getting smaller, but there's more people sort of packing into it, I think, in New York City. And it's a sign of a good thing, is that when these interconnections are starting to get made, there's a lot of flux that's happening, I think.
So we have another question here, which I think is a good one. I'm going to adapt it ever so slightly, because the question is, are there any discussions about dedicating a percentage of lab space to pre-seed companies for very low cost or equity? And I'll twist it around a little bit, which is just really to think about how did you approach thinking about lab space for early stage companies, for pre-seed, for the folks for the folks that haven't raised the A round yet. How did you think about that? Because I imagine you can't just lay out free lab space, right? That's a bit much. But
Yeah.
you also need to incentivize some places for them to go.
Yeah, and I think that there are two interventions that we thought of there. One was, we saw that as one of the components to what the nonprofits and really academic institutions had the resources to stand up as facilities that would service not just themselves but also community members. And so these are academic institutions that had the overhead resources, the facilities management expertise to manage a lab at minimal cost, right, with no profit in mind, that would, by its very nature, benefit research that had no ROI expected, other than publications. What perfect of a ground to establish and plant, an opportunity for a pre-seed company. And look, ideally it had the technology had some affiliation with an academic community already, and make it easier for that academic operator to take in that budding spin out. And then on the other end, if it's a completely independent entity, that was one of the things that we looked to for the incubator initiatives that we did, biolabs being one of them, and its sort of golden ticket process. You enter into a competition, its founding sponsors, BMS, BI, and the EDC would, get into a room and either run its own competition or figure out how to award a golden ticket to a company or a venture that needed it.
Yeah,
endeavor that needed
lab
it.
space per year, right? That's what that is.
I believe so.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a big deal, especially, it's really interesting that when you mentioned BI, that this clicked, right? One of the biggest things is when New York City was able to bring new people into the ecosystem to actually put down roots and care, right? I think everybody that started to do that made a pretty big impact. I remember the folks from BI were some of the first ones that did that as well. Right, each kind of new entrant where they go in and really start to try to play a part in the community, I think is a huge addition. You're kind of creating, you're creating momentum, and you're creating opportunity that just wasn't there anymore. Now you're creating people with a vested interest of making something out of their time, and I think that just helps for everybody.
Yeah.
All right, so tell you what, we'll do David's first. Right. So David basically says, what do the entrepreneurs not know in terms of lectures, courses? What are kind of the hidden gems that people aren't seeing enough of?
I mean, it depends on what stage you are and what your experience level is. There are a lot of interventions for a lot of different folks. What was right for folks who were going to eLab NYC aren't necessarily right for folks who should be talking to Versant or talking to Johannes for space at Biolabs. And I think it varies. There are a lot of resources. I would say that, that's a longer conversation to be had with, honestly, the likes of you guys, Derek and Jennifer, or people who, maybe if you asked, years ago, whether it was government you should be talking to, maybe not, but certainly now, people in government, both on the state at Empire State Development and EDC, are very well aware of the resources that are available. And also, what's great is that they're coming out with new programs every day.
Yep.
They're thinking about programs, certainly. And, for folks should avail themselves of their awareness.
Yeah,
I would say, because it's free advice.
Yeah.
Other than the coffee.
I don't know. I think the return on investment on coffee is always positive. Okay, so
especially if you don't have your coffee this morning, Derek.
listen, I'm going to have a very high value cup of coffee as soon as this webinar is over. Okay, so let's kind of put the closing piece on this story here. So you actually you went and joined a company, right? And we love Envisagenics. We talk about Envisagenics all day, but the interesting thing to me here is what was the process of saying, okay, I kind of see I want to actually jump into one of these ventures. How did you think about that? How did you approach going somewhere else? How did you approach searching for what the thing was that you wanted to do? Right? How did you think about what position that you wanted? What was that like?
Yeah,
right?
so
you ended up in a great place. We love the end to the story, but what was the process like?
Yeah. Look, I think it was very much, a pull away from EDC as opposed to a push. I want to get that very clear. As you can tell, I love the work at EDC, and I still love the work that they do, and have full confidence in the team that's been built since I left. It was a sort of coming up on the turn of the administration. And I was very enthusiastic about Adams. I had a chance to previously meet him when he came through EDC to talk. We collaborated with his team on the support that we provided to Brooklyn Army Terminal. And so I knew that he would continue on the support of life sciences. So I had no doubt in my mind that if I stayed, I'd be fine, right? The team would be further empowered, if anything. But at the same time, I took stock of everything I accomplished, launching the initiative, managing the initiative, COVID response, which I helped a lot out with. We didn't even touch about that, and my work with Opentrons. But maybe for another time. I said, well, look, I've accomplished perhaps all I can, and also all that I need to. It's probably time to recycle the blood here. Or recycle it for new blood and new ideas, fresh ideas. Somebody who's probably less likely to say, "Oh, we've tried that already. Not worth it."
Yeah.
And I always said from the first week that I joined EDC that my job in government, in a place like EDC and doing an initiative like Life Sci NYC, should be to work myself out of a job.
Yes.
And then I'll know I've been successful. And so I said, okay, now's the time. So, look, I did spend a good portion of 2015 sort of taking my time and seeing, if there was something that was attractive to me. Very much similar to the Rafael story with the invitation to join EDC. Maria Luisa Pineda did invite me very, very kindly and generously to join her team as she was building out a partnering arm that thought about partnerships very strategically in a way that weren't commercial right away, the same way that the most recent partnership with BMS is. But how could we partner on scientific ideas and scientific work, on data sharing initiatives, just as examples of two, that didn't have typical biopharma drug development economics associated with it, but what it did do is open windows of opportunity to bring those partners together around an opportunity that involved those downstream economics. So it's long-term thinking, very creative, but also a liberty to take risky bets, which I liked. So it was very compelling to me. I did listen to a bunch of other types of pitches, but combined with the visionary leadership of founders, like scientific founders like Maria and Martin, I couldn't say no.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's so it's funny. So people are always referenced as the biggest thing. Did you think it all about capitalization or risk? How did you think about those things, right? You were at a place that didn't carry those kind of risks, and you got to kind of, sit and look at the rest of the community. How did you think about kind of startup risk and what you were pursuing?
Yeah, the company had just raised a Series A, closed a Series A. I congratulated them actually, but not thinking twice about it. And then running into Maria at a dinner, she did say that she was growing her team. I did start. Obviously the public announcements of Biogen and J&J made it attractive. That their time and sort of the reputation that they developed, the positive reputation that they developed as being a tenant of J Labs. They had a lot of things going for them, and we still do have a lot of things going for us. There was a lot of de-risking factors, I would say, to the presentation of the opportunity. And look, I think, I did get somewhat of a preview of what would be coming down the pike in 2022, and some realized, some not, but that what was realized was the majority of it, and it was, I think that's a sign that things are boding well for the company and its leadership.
And was it hard shifting? And I too, because you had just also worked to stand up all of the cities, the testing program and Opentrons, and was it hard shifting gears sort of kind of in the middle of the pandemic, not knowing sort of where we were? Like, how was that?
Shifting gears in 2020?
Yes.
Yeah, it was. I think folks at EDC took a pause and are like, well, and I don't know if Sue touched upon this in her episode with you guys or Doug, but the unfortunate reality is that a lot of programs did need to get cut.
No, I mean, when you shifted to Envisagenics sort of during you were in the middle of the pandemic.
I was in the middle of the pandemic. Well, look, I think I started to sunset a lot of my commitments and managerial properties of responsibilities to pandemic operations. The Opentrons thing that was handed off to the health and hospitals in New York City, the public health system of New York City. So, there wasn't much going on in terms of having to continue on COVID response efforts, at least and not in my purview. And then also a lot of it was preparing for the transition of mayoral administrations and gearing up to, what Adams might want to do with life sciences or in economic development in general. So there was a natural lull, and then, for folks to leave if they wanted to. And so you'll see that. I mean, if you look at people's LinkedIn and the migratory patterns of civil servants, you'll see that it's not that people are asked to leave. A lot in most cases, it's just a natural transition point. It's actually better for everyone because it allows for fresh ideas, a fresh perspective. The team that they've built is what's fantastic is that they've continued to hire PhDs in the life sciences, which I was the first ever scientist to be hired by the EDC. Everyone at the EDC, all 450 of my colleagues, when I first meet them, they would ask me, "Why aren't you out curing cancer? What are you doing here?"
You're like, I'm trying to enable other companies to be able to.
I'm trying to let 50 other people try to cure cancer.
Yeah, I'm helping the guy cure cancer. Or
So we only have a few minutes left, but one thing I think the audience would like to know about is your role at Envisagenics and your colleague, you and Kevin show, right? You sort of you divide up the way you think about strategic partnerships and business partnerships, and talk to us about how you and Envisagenics approach your outlook there.
Yeah, so you're right. So Kevin is very much more so on the commercial driven partnerships, and he pounds the pavement in generating the relationships with biopharma, as Martine and Maria would say, to help us develop drugs against novel targets that we identify through our machine learning technology. And as I said earlier, my role is to think a little bit more upstream of those commercial partnerships on data sets that may not be readily available to us through public domain that could change our perspective of a particular disease area that's a priority to us in a meaningful way, to shift in how we execute on the target discovery, or to compel us to prioritize a particular disease area based on a very compelling piece of data that others may not have access to. One example would be in certain metabolic diseases, data, RNA-seq data specifically, may be harder to come by, and may be just the right competitive edge to get an early start on target discovery and thereby drug development after that.
Right. So we're down to 2 minutes, Carlo. Can you sum up sort of, we've talked a lot about where the ecosystem has been, your role in helping grow it. So let's put on your forward-looking hat, and where do you think the ecosystem is headed over the next, we'll give you a longer window. We'll be generous today. We'll say 5 to 10 years in New York.
Yeah, where are we going to be in 2033?
I think you'll certainly see these real estate projects up, right? The new Spark building, 455 First Avenue, you'll see them humming along. Hopefully Alexandria's North Tower will be up and running. My aspiration and hope is that you will attract a big biopharma or biotech, and that a logo will be on a building at some point in time in the future. I want what London got in Merck across from the British Library. I want that deal for New York.
Yeah.
Not Merck specifically, but we'll also take Merck. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll take
Merck's a great company.
Merck's a good one.
Right? So yeah, I think that's sort of the personal aspiration I have for New York City, right? And then I guess, look, a moonshot would be if Envisagenics' logo was on one of those buildings.
I was hoping you were going to go there. I was trying to figure out kind of, I thought I could chat you or something like that. I would love to see Envisagenics' logo on a building. We have a lot of seeds in the soil here, right? And we have, I think there are a lot of things that have moved in the right direction, and you've had a really big hand in a lot of that. So, we're really thankful for everything that you have done for New York, and thrilled to see what you're doing now. And, we've remarked over the past however long that New York has just been on an incredible upswing for a while now. And there's a lot of people, yourself included, that have really helped make that happen.
Well, thank you so much, guys. It really means a lot.
Thank you for your time today. But more importantly, thanks for all you've done for the ecosystem. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good Tuesday.